My wife accidentally sent my son's school lunchbox to me. I jokingly showed my colleague who was an EX doctor. He turned pale and said, "Get your son and go to the hospital immediately." "Why?" I asked. "I can't explain now. It's horrible. Do as I say or your son won't survive." What I discovered at the hospital left me speechless. My name is Marcus Hale, and if you'd asked me 6 months ago what my biggest problem was, I probably would have said something stupid like deciding between the BMW or the Tesla for my midlife crisis mobile. Yeah, I'm that guy, 39 years old, running a mid-sized tech security firm called Hale Dynamics, living the American dream one encrypted server at a time. Life had finally stopped kicking me in the teeth long enough for me to catch my breath and actually enjoy what I'd built. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't always smooth sailing. After my first wife died in that car accident 5 years back, I thought I was done. Finished. Ready to pack it in and become one of those bitter divorced dads who drinks beer for breakfast and yells at kids to get off his lawn. But then Clara came along with her sunshine smile and her way of making scrambled eggs that didn't taste like rubber, and suddenly the world didn't seem like such a hostile place anymore. She married me, adopted Oliver, my 9-year-old son who's basically the only reason I bother getting up in the morning. And for the first time since Sarah died, I felt like I could actually breathe again. Oliver's this incredible kid, you know? Smart as a whip, funny in that brutal way only kids can be, and he still thinks I'm some kind of superhero instead of just another guy who lucked into success by being paranoid about computer security. He's got these huge brown eyes that light up when he talks about rockets or dinosaurs or whatever random obsession has captured his attention that week. The kid's my anchor, my purpose, my everything wrapped up in a small package that smells like grape juice and adventured. So there I was that Tuesday morning, sitting in my downtown office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and its view of the city that makes visitors think I'm way more successful than I actually am, getting ready to meet with a potential new client. Dr. Adrian Vaughn used to be some hotshot trauma surgeon until he burned out and decided to pivot into consulting work. The guy had contacted me about upgrading his practice's cybersecurity, which seemed routine enough. In my line of work, you get used to doctors, lawyers, and accountants who suddenly realize their patient files are about as secure as a screen door on a submarine. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Clara. Now, my wife's not usually the type to bother me during work hours. She knows I'm weird about keeping business and family separate. But when I saw her name pop up, I figured it was probably something about dinner plans or reminding me to pick up milk on the way home. You know, normal married couple stuff. Instead, I got this. "Oops. I think I swapped Oliver's lunchbox into your briefcase. He probably has your files." "Sorry, honey." Grinning face with sweat. I actually laughed out loud, which is not something that happens often in my office. The mental image of my 9-year-old sitting in Mrs. Peterson's 4th grade class, opening up a folder full of network security protocols instead of his peanut butter and jelly sandwich, was pretty damn amusing. Clara's always been a little scattered in the mornings. She's one of those people who can't function without at least 2 cups of coffee and a small miracle. So mix-ups like this weren't exactly unprecedented that I popped open my briefcase, and sure enough, there was Oliver's lunch instead of the Vaughn contract I'd been planning to review. This little blue lunchbox covered in superhero stickers that he'd picked out himself, complete with Batman, Spider-Man, and some character I couldn't identify, but that he assured me was totally awesome, Dad. The thing was beat up from months of elementary school abuse, but Oliver treated it like treasure, so I treated it like treasure too. When Dr. Vaughn showed up, tall guy, graying hair, the kind of steady presence you'd want in an operating room, I decided to break the ice with the lunchbox story. "You want to see something that'll restore your faith in humanity?" I said, pulling out the little blue box. My wife accidentally packed my son's lunch in my work bag. Kid's probably trying to figure out what to do with a bunch of firewall specifications right about now. I expected him to chuckle, maybe share his own story about parenting mishaps. Instead, Dr. Adrian Vaughn looked like he'd just seen a ghost rise up from the dead and ask for directions to the nearest Starbucks. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out right there on my office carpet. His hand started trembling, not just a little nervous shake, but full-on earthquake tremors that made me wonder if he was having some kind of medical episode. Then he did something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. He leaned forward, looked me dead in the eyes with an intensity that could have burned holes through steel, and whispered, "Marcus, listen carefully. Get Oliver. Get to the hospital. Now." I tried to laugh it off, because what else do you do when someone goes from normal conversation to full-blown panic mode over a lunchbox? Come on, Adrian. It's just a lunch mix-up. Kids survive worse than missing their sandwich for one day. But the look in his eyes stopped my attempted humor cold. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't an overreaction. This was pure, concentrated terror. "What?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "What's wrong? What are you seeing that I'm not?" Adrian's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, like he was afraid someone might be listening through the walls. "I can't explain here, Marcus. Not now. Just do exactly what I'm telling you. Get your son and get him to a hospital immediately. Have them run a full blood panel. Tell them you suspect poisoning." The word hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Poisoning. My mind tried to process it, tried to make sense of what he was suggesting, but it felt like trying to solve calculus while someone was screaming in my ear. "That's impossible. You're talking about my wife, Adrian. Clara would never. She loves Oliver like he's her own son." "Marcus." His voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much death, too much tragedy, too many families destroyed by things they never saw coming. "I've been a doctor for 20 years. I know what arsenic residue looks like, and there's enough on that lunchbox to kill a grown man. Your son won't survive if you don't move. Right now." My blood turned to ice, my vision tunneled, and suddenly my comfortable office with its expensive furniture and its view of the city felt like a tomb. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about the woman I'd married and trusted with my son's life, crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and that damn lunchbox and ran. The drive to St. Anne's Medical Center felt like navigating through some twisted nightmare where every red light lasted an eternity and every other driver had apparently decided this was the perfect day to forget how to operate a motor vehicle. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight I thought I might snap it in half, and my mind kept ping-ponging between rational explanations and the growing dread that was eating me alive from the inside out. Maybe Adrian was wrong. Maybe he was having some kind of breakdown. Former trauma surgeons probably see death and danger everywhere, right? Maybe the residue he thought he saw was just leftover superhero sticker adhesive or some random lunch spillage that looked suspicious to someone who'd spent too many years dealing with worst-case scenarios. Hell, maybe this whole thing was just one massive misunderstanding that we'd all laugh about later over beers. But then I remembered the look in his eyes, that absolute certainty that comes from years of medical training and seeing things that normal people never have to see. Adrian Vaughn wasn't the type to panic over nothing. If he said there was arsenic on that lunchbox, then there was arsenic on that lunchbox, which meant someone had been slowly poisoning my son. That I called the school from the car, trying to keep my voice steady while my world imploded. "Hi, this is Marcus Hale, Oliver's dad. I need to pick him up for a family emergency." The secretary, Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been dealing with elementary school chaos for about 30 years, didn't even question it. "Of course, Mr. Hale. I'll have him ready at the front office." 20 minutes later, I was walking through those familiar school hallways that smelled like disinfectant and childhood dreams, trying to look like a normal dad instead of someone whose entire reality had just been fed through a wood chipper. Oliver was waiting for me with his backpack and that huge grin that could light up a football stadium. "Dad, are we going somewhere cool?" Mrs. Peterson said it was a surprise. He bounced on his toes with that endless energy that 9-year-olds seem to run on, completely oblivious to the fact that his world might be falling apart too. "Something like that, buddy," I managed, ruffling his hair and trying not to think about how pale he'd been looking lately, how he'd been complaining about stomach aches for months, how Clara always dismissed it as growing pains or too much junk food whenever I brought it up. Growing pains. Jesus Christ. At the hospital, I had to practically bite my tongue off to keep from screaming at the triage nurse to move faster. St. Anne's was one of those places that tried to disguise the fact that it was essentially a human repair shop by painting everything in cheerful colors and hanging motivational posters everywhere. "Healing begins with hope," one of them proclaimed, right next to a picture of a sunset that probably came from a stock photo website. Oliver thought the whole thing was some kind of adventure. He swung his legs from the examination table, pointing at all the medical equipment like he was touring a space station. "Dad, what's that thing do? Can I push the buttons? Why does everything beep so much?" His curiosity was infectious under normal circumstances, but right now it just made my heart feel like it was being squeezed in a vice.dr. Miriam Lee, head of toxicology, looked like someone who'd seen enough poisoning cases to write a very depressing book about it. She was probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and the kind of gentle but direct manner that comes from years of delivering bad news to terrified families. When Adrian pulled her aside and started whispering urgently, I saw her expression shift from professional curiosity to serious concern. "Mr. Hale," she said, turning back to Oliver and me with that carefully controlled voice that medical professionals use when they're trying not to scare the hell out of you. "We're going to need to run some blood work on Oliver. Just routine tests to make sure everything's functioning properly." Oliver perked up. "Blood tests? Like a vampire movie? Cool. If only he knew." Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with texts from Clara. "How did your meeting go? Don't forget we need milk and those crackers Oliver likes." "Should I start dinner without you?" Normal, everyday wife messages that now felt like they were written in some kind of code I couldn't crack. Was she genuinely clueless about what was happening, or was she sitting at home right now, wondering why her plan hadn't worked yet? The thought made me physically sick. While we waited for the lab results, I tried to keep Oliver entertained and distracted, but my mind kept wandering to all the little things I'd ignored or explained away over the past few months. The stomach aches that seemed to come in waves. The times he'd seemed unusually tired after meals. The way Clara always insisted on packing his lunch herself, never letting me or Oliver help with the preparation. She's so particular about nutrition, I'd always thought. She just wants to make sure he's eating healthy. God, I was an idiot, doctor. Lee returned about an hour later, and I could tell from her expression that Adrian hadn't been wrong. She sat down across from us, her hands folded carefully in her lap, and spoke in that gentle but firm tone that doctors use when they're about to destroy your world. "Mr. Hale, Oliver's blood work shows elevated levels of arsenic, consistent with chronic exposure over an extended period of time. The levels suggest he's been ingesting small amounts regularly for several months." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my knees wobble, and I had to grab the edge of the examination table to keep from falling over. Oliver was still swinging his legs, completely oblivious to the fact that someone had been slowly murdering him with his daily lunch. How much exposure are we talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Enough to cause the symptoms he's been experiencing, the stomach pain, fatigue, occasional nausea. If it had continued at this rate." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We all knew where this story was heading. "But he's going to be okay, right? I mean, now that we know what it is, you can fix it. Arsenic poisoning is treatable if caught early enough," which thankfully it was. "We'll start him on chelation therapy immediately to help his body eliminate the remaining toxins." "But Mr. Hale," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "someone has been deliberately poisoning your son. This wasn't accidental exposure. The dosing pattern suggests someone with knowledge of how to administer arsenic in small, consistent amounts designed to look like natural illness." Oliver looked up from the medical equipment he'd been examining. "Dad, why does everyone look so serious? Am I sick or something?" I knelt down next to the examination table and took his small hands in mine, trying to figure out how to explain to a 9-year-old that someone he trusted had been trying to kill him. "You're going to be fine, buddy. The doctors just need to give you some medicine to make sure you stay healthy, okay?" He nodded solemnly, trusting me completely, and I felt something inside my chest crack wide open. This kid had absolute faith that I would protect him, that I would keep him safe, and I'd failed him in the worst possible way. I'd brought a monster into our home and called her family. As Dr. Lee explained the treatment plan and the steps we'd need to take. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Clara. "Everything okay? You've been gone for hours. Oliver must be starving. I made his favorite cookies for when you get home." His favorite cookies. The same type of cookies they'd found traces of arsenic on from the Lunchbox, my wife. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted with my son's life, the woman who'd held Oliver when he cried and read him bedtime stories and tucked him in every night, had been slowly, methodically killing him, and she was sitting at home right now, baking more poison. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching normal families walk by with their normal problems, and felt like I was observing life through bulletproof glass. A mom was arguing with her teenager about curfew. A dad was chasing his toddler around a minivan while juggling grocery bags. Everyday suburban drama that used to be my world too, before I discovered that my wife was a goddamn sociopath. That MY phone kept buzzing like an angry wasp. Clara again. Marcus, where are you? The school said you picked Oliver up for an emergency, but you're not answering. What's happening? I'm starting to get really worried. Answer me. The messages kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. And I had to admit she was either the world's greatest actress or she genuinely had no idea that her poisoning scheme had been discovered. The scary part? I couldn't tell which scenario was worse. Adrian had given me his number before I left the hospital, along with strict instructions to keep Oliver there overnight for observation and the start of his treatment. Don't take him home, Marcus. Not until we figure out what we're dealing with. Smart advice, considering home was apparently where my son had been getting his daily dose of arsenic with his Cheerios that I called Adrian from the parking lot, my hands still shaking like I'd been mainlining espresso for the past 6 hours. The blood work confirmed it, I said when he picked up. Dr. Lee says Oliver's been getting small, consistent doses for months. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. How long do you think this has been going on? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer and really didn't want it confirmed. Based on the levels in his system, I'd say at least 4 to 6 months of regular exposure. Maybe longer if they started with smaller amounts and gradually increased the dosage. 4 to 6 months. That timeline hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. 6 months ago was when Clara had suddenly become obsessed with family planning and insisted we increase Oliver's life insurance policy. Just in case something happens, she'd said. Kids are so accident-prone, and with your job keeping you away so much, I want to make sure he's protected. I thought it was sweet. Responsible. The kind of thing a caring stepmother would think about. Jesus, I was naive. Adrian, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Clara mentioned that her first husband died of a sudden heart attack when he was only 34. Is there any way to tell if he was poisoned too? Adrian finished. Arsenic can cause cardiac episodes, especially with long-term exposure. If someone knew what they were doing, they could make it look like natural causes pretty easily. The pieces were falling into place with the kind of sick precision that made me want to punch something. Clara's first husband, David, had been a successful real estate developer. Plenty of money, good life insurance, no kids to complicate the inheritance. Then he drops dead of a heart attack at 34, leaving Clara a very wealthy widow. Fast forward a couple years, and she meets me, another successful guy with a kid and a comfortable bank account. We fall in love, get married, and suddenly she's got access to Oliver's trust fund and life insurance policy. All she has to do is wait for the grieving period to pass and then start her little science experiment that I called Detective Ryan Keller, an old buddy from my military days who'd ended up in law enforcement after we both got out of the service. Ryan had seen enough domestic cases to know how these things usually played out, and his advice was exactly what I expected but didn't want to hear. Marcus, I believe you, but believing you and proving it in court are two completely different animals. You need evidence. Real evidence. Video footage, documented chain of custody, clear motive. Right now, all you've got is suspicious circumstances and a lot of what-ifs. So what am I supposed to do? Just wait for her to finish the job? No, you document everything. You set up surveillance. You catch her in the act. And you do it all legally, because if you screw this up procedurally, she walks free and probably disappears with whatever money she can grab. That night was the hardest performance of my life. I walked into my house. The house that Clara and I had picked out together, the house where we'd planned to build our future, and acted like everything was normal. Clara rushed to me the moment I opened the door, tears in her eyes, demanding to know where Oliver was and why I wasn't answering my phone. He's fine, I told her, forcing myself to hug her back when every instinct I had was screaming to get as far away from her as possible. Just some vitamin deficiency issues. The doctor wants to keep him overnight for observation and start him on some supplements. Vitamin deficiency? But I've been so careful about his nutrition. She pulled back to look at me, and for just a second, I thought I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Relief? Disappointment? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty was eating me alive. We went through the motions of a normal evening. Dinner together, watching TV on the couch. Clara curled up against me like we were still the happy couple we'd been that morning. She even cried a little, worried about Oliver being alone in the hospital. If I hadn't known what I knew, I would have thought she was the perfect concerned stepmother. Instead, I lay awake all night next to a woman who'd been slowly murdering my son, listening to her breathe and wondering how many other people she'd killed. When she finally fell asleep, I snuck out to my home office and spent the rest of the night setting up a surveillance system that would make the NSA jealous. Cameras in the kitchen, cameras in Oliver's room, audio recording devices in every common area. If Clara so much as sneezed suspiciously, I was going to have it documented in high definition. Ryan was right. I needed evidence that would hold up in court, evidence that would put her away for the rest of her miserable life. The next morning, Clara was back to her usual routine, humming while she made breakfast and asking about when Oliver would be coming home. She offered to pack me a lunch, which made my skin crawl, and suggested she could bake some cookies to take to him at the hospital. The doctor said no outside food for now. I lied, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Something about controlling his diet while they figure out the vitamin issues. For just a split second, so brief I almost missed it, her smile faltered. Just a tiny crack in the perfect wife facade. But it was enough to confirm what I already knew. Clara wasn't just a killer. She was a patient, methodical killer who'd been playing the long game with my son's life. And now it was my turn to play. The next morning felt like I was starring in some twisted reality show where the goal was to act normal while your world burned down around you. Clara bounced around the kitchen like she was auditioning for a cereal commercial, all sunshine smiles and domestic goddess energy. She hummed some pop song I didn't recognize while scrambling eggs, asked if I wanted orange juice or coffee, and generally behaved like the perfect wife who definitely wasn't a cold-blooded killer. I was thinking, she said, flipping eggs with the kind of practiced ease that comes from months of routine. Maybe I could bake those chocolate chip cookies Oliver loves so much. You know, for when he comes home from the hospital. I bet he's missing his favorite treats. My blood turned to ice water. Those chocolate chip cookies, the same type they'd found arsenic residue on from the lunchbox. She was already planning her next move, already thinking about how to continue poisoning my son the moment he walked back through our front door. The doctor said no homemade food for a while. I managed, trying to keep my voice level while every instinct I had screamed to grab her by the throat and demand answers. Something about controlling his diet until they figure out what's causing the vitamin deficiency. Clara's face fell into this picture-perfect expression of maternal disappointment. Oh, that's such a shame. I know how much those cookies mean to him. She paused, spatula in hand, looking genuinely troubled. Poor little guy must be so confused, stuck in that sterile hospital room. I should visit him today, bring some books or games to cheer him up. The casual way she suggested visiting Oliver, the kid she'd been systematically poisoning for months, made me want to vomit. But I just nodded and said something about how that would be nice, while mentally adding, over my dead body, to the end of the sentence, after Clara left for her part-time job at the local art gallery. Because of course the murderous sociopath had a charming, creative career that made everyone think she was just the sweetest thing, I called Adrian and asked him to meet me at my office. We needed to review the surveillance footage, and I needed someone with medical expertise to help me understand what we were looking at. Adrian showed up 20 minutes later with coffee and the kind of grim expression that told me he'd been thinking about this case all night too. We settled into my conference room, pulled up the camera feeds on my laptop, and started our crash course in How to Catch Your Wife Committing Murder 101. The first few hours of footage were exactly what you'd expect from hidden cameras in a suburban house. Clara getting ready for work, checking her phone, doing normal wife things that would have been boring as hell under different circumstances. But then we got to the part where she went into Oliver's room. On screen, Clara stood in the doorway for a long moment, just staring at Oliver's empty bed. Then she walked over to his desk, where he kept his collection of toy cars and action figures, and started moving things around. Not cleaning or organizing, just examining everything. Like she was taking inventory of what she'd have to deal with after he was gone. Look at her face, Adrian said quietly, pointing at the screen. That's not grief or worry. That's calculation. He was right. Clara's expression was completely different from the concerned stepmother act she'd been performing for me. Her face was cold, analytical, almost businesslike as she surveyed Oliver's possessions. This wasn't a woman missing a sick child. This was someone mentally cataloging assets. Then she did something that made my stomach drop through the floor. She went to my home office, sat down at my computer, and started typing. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but I could see enough of the screen to tell she was researching something online. Fast, focused typing like someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. "Can you enhance that?" I asked Adrienne, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she'd been searching for. "Not really, but we can check your browser history later. If she didn't clear it, we'll know exactly what she was researching." That evening, Detective Ryan Keller called with some information that confirmed my worst fears and then made them about 10 times worse. "I did some digging on your wife's background," he said without preamble. "Her maiden name is Claudine Mercer, not Clara Morrison like she told you. And here's the fun part. Claudine Mercer has been married 3 times, not twice. 3 times. Husband number 1, James Patterson, died of a sudden heart attack at age 31. Husband number 2, Michael Torres, died of what looked like a drug overdose at 35, except he'd never used drugs in his life. And then there's David Morrison, husband number 3, who you already know about. 3 dead husbands. 3 sudden deaths of healthy men in their 30s. The pattern was so obvious it was practically screaming at us, but somehow she'd managed to fly under the radar for years. "There's more," Ryan continued. "I ran her social security number through the system. Claudine Mercer has been flagged by insurance companies in 2 different states for suspicious claims. Nothing they could prove, but enough red flags to make them nervous. Your wife, Marcus, is a professional. A professional." That explained the careful dosing, the patience, the way she'd managed to make Oliver's symptoms look like normal childhood complaints. This wasn't some crime of passion or domestic dispute gone wrong. This was a calculated business operation with my son as the target. When Clara came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and what I hoped looked like a normal husband's smile. She kissed me hello, asked about my day, and settled in next to me on the couch like we were still the happy couple we'd been 72 hours ago. "How's Oliver doing?" she asked, stroking my arm with those manicured fingers that had been measuring out poison doses. I called the hospital, but they said only immediate family could get updates. "He's doing better. Should be home in a day or 2. I watched her face carefully, looking for any reaction. "Dr. Lee thinks the vitamin supplements are already helping." Clara smiled that perfect wife smile. "That's wonderful news. I've been so worried about him." Worried about him. The woman who'd been slowly killing my son was worried about him. That night, I checked my browser history after Clara went to sleep. What I found made my blood run cold. She'd been researching children's grief counseling services, single father support groups, and, most chilling of all, the average processing time for life insurance claims involving minor children. She wasn't just planning to kill Oliver. She was already preparing for the aftermath, figuring out how to comfort me through my tragic loss, and help me navigate the practical details of collecting on my dead son's insurance policy. The next morning brought a breakthrough that would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. Detective Keller called while Clara was in the shower, his voice tight with excitement. "Marcus, we got her. Not for the murders, not yet, but we've got her on fraud charges that'll stick. Turns out Claudine Mercer is wanted in Nevada for insurance fraud, and the statute of limitations hasn't run out. We can arrest her today if you want." "What about Oliver? What about building a case for the poisoning?" "We'll get there, but this gives us leverage. Once we have her in custody, we can search the house, analyze everything in that kitchen, and build the attempted murder case properly." "But Marcus," his voice got serious, "we need to catch her in the act if we want this to stick. Can you handle being bait?" "Bait?" "Using myself and Oliver as bait to catch a woman who'd already killed 3 men and was working on victim number 4. "Yeah," I said, watching Clara through the bathroom door as she did her hair, preparing for another day of playing the perfect wife. "I can handle it. Time to see just how good an actress Claudine Mercer really was. Setting a trap for someone who's been systematically murdering people for years isn't exactly covered in your typical How to Be a Good Husband manual. But after 3 sleepless nights of watching surveillance footage and discovering that my wife was basically the suburban version of a Black Widow spider, I was ready to get creative with my approach to marital problem solving. The plan Ryan and I had cooked up was simple in theory, but terrifying in practice. We needed to catch Clara in the act of attempting to poison either Oliver or me, with enough evidence to make the charges stick in court. That meant giving her both the opportunity and the motivation to try again, which basically translated to using my family as bait in the world's most fucked up fishing expedition. You sure you can handle this? Ryan asked during our morning strategy session at a coffee shop across town from my office. Because once we set this in motion, there's no backing out. She's going to try to kill you or Oliver, and we need to let her get close enough to actually attempt it before we can move in. I can handle it, I said, though my hands were shaking enough to make my coffee cup rattle against the table. Just tell me what you need me to do. The first step was creating the right motivation. Clara wasn't killing for passion or revenge. She was killing for money. So we needed to make her think that the financial landscape was about to change in a way that threatened her plans. That evening, I came home with a story about updating my will. I had an interesting conversation with Gerald Price today, I told Clara over dinner, referring to my attorney. He suggested I make some changes to my estate planning, especially considering Oliver's health issues. Clara looked up from her salad, fork paused halfway to her mouth. What kind of changes? Well, if something happens to Oliver, God forbid, Gerald thinks it would be better to establish a charitable foundation in his memory rather than just leaving everything to family. You know, help other kids with health problems, that sort of thing. I watched her face carefully as I delivered this particular piece of fiction. For just a second, her perfect wife mask slipped, and I saw something cold and calculating flash behind her eyes. She recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. That's very thoughtful of you, she said, her voice just a little too controlled. Though I hope we never have to worry about anything like that. Oliver's going to be fine. Of course he is, I agreed, while mentally adding, because I'm going to make damn sure you never get another chance to hurt him. The next morning, Clara was back to her usual routine, but there was something different about her energy. She moved through the kitchen with more purpose, more focus, like someone who'd made a decision and was ready to act on it. When she offered to pack me a thermos of homemade soup for Oliver, every alarm bell in my head started ringing at maximum volume. That's sweet of you, I said, accepting the thermos with hands that I hoped weren't visibly shaking. I'm sure he'll appreciate having something from home. Clara smiled that perfect stepmother smile. I made it extra hearty. Growing boys need their nutrition, especially when they're recovering. Recovering, right. From the poison she'd been feeding him for months, that I took the thermos straight to the hospital, where Dr. Lee was waiting with a testing kit that could analyze the contents for toxins. Adrian had called ahead to prepare her, so she knew exactly what we were dealing with and why we needed fast results. Give me 20 minutes, she said, disappearing into the lab with Clara's nutritious soup. Those 20 minutes felt like 20 years. I sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at my phone and trying to look like a normal worried father instead of someone whose wife had just tried to murder him with lunch. Oliver was upstairs, getting stronger every day as the chelation therapy cleared the arsenic from his system, completely unaware that his stepmother was downstairs trying to finish what she'd started. When Dr. Lee came back, her expression told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. Arsenic, she said quietly. Enough to kill an adult male within hours. If you'd actually consumed this. She didn't need to finish the sentence. That my phone was already in my hand, dialing Ryan's number. We got her, I said when he picked up. The soup's loaded with arsenic. How fast can you move? We're already in position. Just give us the word. But first, we needed Clara to think her plan had worked. I called her from the hospital, my voice carefully modulated to sound panicked and grief-stricken. Clara, you need to come to the hospital right now. Something's happened with Oliver. What? What's wrong? Is he okay? Just get here as fast as you can. Room 314. I could hear her moving around on the other end of the line, probably grabbing her keys and her purse, maybe checking her appearance in the mirror one last time before heading off to play the grieving stepmother role. The thought made me sick, but it also filled me with a savage satisfaction. She thought she was coming to collect on her investment. Instead, she was walking straight into the trap we'd set for her. 30 minutes later, Clara came rushing through the hospital corridors, her face a perfect mask of maternal panic and concern. She found me standing outside Oliver's room, and I have to admit, her performance was Oscar-worthy. Tears in her eyes, hands shaking. The whole devastated stepmother act played to perfection. "Marcus, what happened? Is Oliver okay?" "The nurses won't tell me anything. He's stable," I said, letting my voice crack just a little. "But Clara, the doctors found something. Something that changes everything." That's when Detective Keller stepped out from around the corner, badge in hand, along with two uniformed officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. "Mrs. Hale," Ryan said, his voice professionally calm, "I'm Detective Keller with the city police. I need to ask you some questions about your stepson's condition." Clara's face went through a series of micro-expressions. Confusion, fear, calculation, before settling on confused innocence. "I don't understand. What's this about? What kind of questions?" "We have reason to believe that Oliver has been the victim of deliberate poisoning," Ryan continued, watching her reaction carefully. "Specifically, arsenic poisoning administered over a period of several months." The color drained from Clara's face, but she held on to her innocent act like a lifeline. "Poisoning? That's impossible. Who would do such a thing? Are you sure the tests are accurate?" "We're very sure," I said, stepping closer to her. "We're also sure about the arsenic in the soup you made me this morning." For the first time since I'd known her, Clara's mask completely slipped. The caring stepmother disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "You bastard," she whispered. "You set me up." Ryan stepped forward with the handcuffs. "Claudine Mercer, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Oliver Hale and Marcus Hale." As the cuffs clicked into place, Claudine, looked at me with eyes like broken glass. "You think this is over? You think Oliver's safe now? I have friends, Marcus. People who don't like loose ends." The threat hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to keep my voice steady. "The only thing that's over is your ability to hurt my son." As they led her away, I could hear her shouting threats and promises of revenge that echoed through the hospital corridors like something out of a nightmare. But for the first time in days, I could breathe again. Oliver was safe. The monster was in custody. At least, that's what I thought. Clara arrived at St. Anne's Medical Center looking like she'd been through a blender set on emotional breakdown. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from what appeared to be genuine tears, and she was wearing mismatched clothes like she'd thrown on whatever was closest to the door. If I didn't know what I knew, I would have thought she was just another panicked parent rushing to their child's bedside. The performance was so convincing it almost made me doubt myself for a split second. Almost. She spotted me standing in the hallway outside Oliver's room and practically threw herself into my arms, sobbing against my chest with the kind of raw desperation that would have fooled anyone who wasn't aware she was a stone-cold killer. "Marcus, thank God you're okay," she gasped between sobs. "When you called and said something had happened to Oliver, I thought I was going to lose both of you. Both of us. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so sick." "Where is he?" she demanded, pulling back to look at me with red-rimmed eyes that actually had real tears in them. "Is he okay? What happened?" The nurse at the desk wouldn't tell me anything, just said to wait here. That's when Detective Keller stepped out from the family consultation room, where he'd been waiting with two uniformed officers. Clara's face went from maternal panic to confused wariness in about half a second. "Mrs. Hale," Ryan said, his voice carrying that particular tone cops use when they're about to ruin someone's day, "I'm Detective Keller with the Metropolitan Police. I need to speak with you about your stepson's medical condition." Clara looked back and forth between Ryan and me, and I could practically see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she tried to figure out what was happening. "I don't understand. Is this about Oliver? Is there some kind of legal issue with his treatment?" "You could say that," Ryan replied. "Mrs. Hale, we have reason to believe that Oliver has been the victim of deliberate poisoning over an extended period of time. Specifically, arsenic poisoning." The word arsenic hit Clara like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat in what would have been a convincing display of shock if I hadn't known better. "Poisoning," she whispered. That's impossible. Who would do such a thing to a child? Are you absolutely certain about this?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. She was good, really good, at this whole innocent victim routine. If I hadn't seen the surveillance footage of her cold, calculating expression while she researched my son's insurance policy, I might have fallen for it myself. We're very certain, I said, stepping closer to her. Just like we're certain about what was in that thermos of soup you made for me this morning. Clara's eyes went wide, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something that looked like genuine fear flicker across her face. The soup? Marcus, what are you talking about? I made that for Oliver because I thought he might be getting tired of hospital food. Funny thing about that soup, Dr. Lee said, appearing at my shoulder like she'd been waiting for her cue. When we tested it, we found enough arsenic to kill a grown man within hours. Interesting choice of ingredients for a sick child. That's when Clara's carefully constructed facade finally started to crack. She looked around at all of us, Ryan, Dr. Lee, the uniformed officers, me, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find a way out of the trap that was closing around her. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. There must be some kind of mistake. Maybe the soup was contaminated somehow, or maybe someone tampered with it after I made it. I would never hurt Oliver. I love him like he's my own son. Cut the shit, Claudine, Ryan said, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. Yeah, that's right. We know who you really are. Claudine Mercer, wanted in Nevada for insurance fraud. 3 dead husbands. All of them healthy men who died suddenly and mysteriously. You want to keep playing the innocent stepmother, or do you want to make this easier on yourself? The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The sobbing, panicked wife disappeared completely, replaced by something cold and predatory that looked at all of us like we were obstacles to be eliminated. Claudine, straightened her shoulders, wiped the tears from her eyes, and smiled with all the warmth of a shark. Well, she said, her voice now completely steady and devoid of emotion. I suppose the charade is over. It was like watching someone remove a mask, except the mask had been her entire personality. The woman I'd married, the woman who'd read Oliver bedtime stories and made pancakes on Sunday mornings, had never existed. She'd been a carefully crafted character designed to get close to my son and my bank account. You want to know the funny part? Claudine continued, apparently deciding that if she was going down, she might as well enjoy the moment. Oliver actually liked the cookies. He always asked for seconds, never suspected a thing. These are the best cookies ever, Clara, he'd say. Sweet kid. Too bad he won't be around to enjoy many more of them. The casual cruelty in her voice made me want to wrap my hands around her throat, but Ryan caught my arm before I could move. Easy, Marcus. Don't give her the satisfaction. Claudine laughed, a sound like broken glass scraping against concrete. Oh, Marcus is much too civilized for violence. That's why this was so easy. You trusted me completely, didn't you? Let me into your home, into your family, into your bed. Gave me access to everything I needed to destroy you piece by piece. What? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Why Oliver? He's just a kid. Because kids have the best life insurance policies, she said matter-of-factly. And because grieving widowers make terrible financial decisions. You would have been so grateful for my support, so dependent on my help getting through the loss. Within a year, maybe 2, you would have signed over everything to me without even thinking about it. The plan was so coldly calculated, so methodically cruel, that it took my breath away. She hadn't just been trying to kill Oliver. She'd been planning to psychologically destroy me in the aftermath, to use my grief as a weapon against my own judgment. James Patterson thought he was getting a devoted wife too, Ryan said, consulting his file. So did Michael Torres and David Morrison. Funny how all your husbands seem to have these sudden medical emergencies right around the 2-year mark. Claudine shrugged. 2 years is about how long it takes to get access to everything you need and establish the right patterns. Any shorter, and people get suspicious. Any longer, and you start getting attached, which is bad for business. Bad for business. She was talking about murdering people like it was a career path. Ryan stepped forward with the handcuffs. Claudine Mercer, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Oliver Hale and Marcus Hale, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about 6 other charges that we'll figure out once we get you downtown. As the cuffs clicked into place, Claudine looked directly at me with eyes that held no trace of humanity. You think you've won something here, Marcus? You think Oliver's safe now just because you caught me? I think you're going to prison for the rest of your miserable life, I said. She smiled that predatory shark smile again. I have friends, Marcus. People who don't like loose ends. People who don't appreciate having their business arrangements interrupted. Oliver may have survived me, but there are others who might not be so patient with their methods. The threat hit me like ice water in my veins, but before I could respond, the officers were leading her away. Her voice echoed down the hospital corridor as she continued shouting threats and promises of revenge that sounded like something out of a horror movie. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started. They'll come for both of you. As her voice faded into the distance, I stood in the hospital hallway feeling like I'd just survived a car crash. Oliver was safe, Claudine was in custody, but her final words kept echoing in my head that I have friends. What the hell had I gotten us into? 3 days after Claudine's arrest, I was sitting in my living room trying to pretend that life could go back to normal, when Adrian showed up at my door with a file folder that looked thick enough to choke a horse and an expression that told me my nightmare was just getting started. Oliver was upstairs in his room, finally home from the hospital and slowly getting his color back as the chelation therapy did its work. He'd been asking questions about why Clara wasn't around anymore, and I'd been giving him carefully sanitized answers about how sometimes adults make bad choices and have to go away for a while. The kid was resilient, but I could see the confusion in his eyes every time he looked at the empty spot where his stepmother used to sit at the breakfast table. "We need to talk," Adrian said without preamble, settling into my kitchen with the file folder and 2 cups of coffee that I suspected we were both going to need. "Ryan asked me to share some information with you. Off the record. Information that's going to make you really unhappy. Unhappier than discovering my wife was slowly murdering my son." I asked, though I had a sinking feeling that the answer was going to be yes. Adrian opened the folder and spread out what looked like surveillance photos, financial records, and police reports from multiple jurisdictions. Claudine wasn't working alone, Marcus. She's part of something bigger. Much bigger. The first photo showed Claudine sitting in what looked like a coffee shop, deep in conversation with a woman I didn't recognize. Brunette, maybe 50 years old, wearing the kind of expensive clothes that suggested serious money. The second photo showed the same woman meeting with a different younger woman outside what appeared to be a law office. "Margaret Doyle," Adrian said, pointing to the brunette. "Former insurance adjuster, fired for falsifying claims about 15 years ago. Since then, she's been running what law enforcement is calling a Black Widow network." A Black Widow network. The phrase made my blood run cold, but it also explained so much about how professional Claudine's operation had been. "It works like this," Adrian continued, pulling out what looked like an organizational chart. "Doyle recruits women with the right psychological profile, attractive, intelligent, sociopathic enough to kill for money, but disciplined enough to be patient about it. She trains them, gives them new identities, and deploys them to target wealthy men with assets worth taking." The chart looked like something out of a corporate presentation, except instead of sales territories and profit margins, it was mapping out murder operations across multiple states. Names, target profiles, estimated timelines for completion of objectives. It was horrifying and fascinating in equal measure. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Best estimates say about 12 years. Maybe longer. The network has been responsible for at least 15 confirmed deaths, possibly more. The victims are always wealthy men, usually with children from previous marriages who complicate inheritance issues. That explained why Claudine had been so focused on Oliver's life insurance and trust fund. It wasn't just about getting my money. It was about eliminating any complications that might interfere with a clean financial inheritance." Adrian flipped to another section of the file, showing financial records that made my head spin. "The operation is surprisingly sophisticated. They've got a chemist who provides untraceable poisons, a forger who creates new identities, even a few corrupt officials who help smooth over any awkward questions about sudden deaths. Dr. Felix Braun," he said, pointing to a photo of a thin, nervous-looking man in his 60s. "Former pharmaceutical researcher, lost his license for conducting unauthorized human trials. Now he makes custom toxins for Doyle's network. The arsenic that was used on Oliver came from his lab. The idea that there was an entire underground operation dedicated to this kind of systematic murder made me feel sick. It wasn't just random violence or crimes of passion. It was organized, methodical, businesslike in its efficiency. And this woman, Adrian continued, showing me a photo of someone who looked like a librarian, Harriet Beck, expert forger, specializes in creating bulletproof false identities. She's the one who turned Claudine Mercer into Clara Morrison. So there are more of them out there, I said, and it wasn't really a question. More women like Claudine, targeting other families. At least 6 that we know of, probably more. The network operates cells across multiple states: Nevada, California, Arizona, Texas, Florida. Wherever there are wealthy men with assets worth stealing. Adrian pulled out another set of photos that made my stomach drop through the floor. This is what really concerns law enforcement, Marcus. These are recent surveillance photos taken near your neighborhood. The network knows that Claudine was arrested, and they're not happy about it. The photos showed various people, men and women, sitting in cars, walking past my house, lingering in the coffee shop where I usually grab my morning caffeine fix. Professional surveillance, the kind that suggested serious resources and planning. They're watching us, I said, stating the obvious because my brain was still trying to process the implications. They're evaluating you as a threat, Adrian corrected. Claudine was one of their most successful operatives. Her arrest represents a significant financial loss to the network, not to mention the risk that she might cooperate with law enforcement to reduce her sentence. Is she cooperating? So far, no. Claudine's keeping her mouth shut, probably because she knows what happens to people who betray Margaret Doyle. But the network doesn't know that she'll stay quiet, which makes you and Oliver potential liabilities. The threat was clear enough. As long as I existed as a witness to Claudine's crimes, as long as Oliver survived as evidence of her attempted murder, we represented a danger to the entire operation. Dead witnesses couldn't testify. Dead victims couldn't contradict carefully constructed stories about tragic accidents. What does law enforcement plan to do about this? I asked, though I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. They're building a case, but it's going to take time. Months, maybe years to gather enough evidence to take down the entire network. In the meantime, Adrian spread his hands in a gesture that basically said, "You're on your own." I thought about Oliver upstairs, playing with his action figures and slowly recovering from months of systematic poisoning. I thought about the people in those surveillance photos, professional killers who viewed my family as a business problem that needed to be solved. I thought about spending the next few years looking over my shoulder, never knowing if today was the day they decided we were too much of a risk to let live. There is another option, Adrian said quietly, like he was reading my mind. I know someone. Someone who specializes in handling problems like this when official channels aren't fast enough. What kind of someone? The kind who makes problems disappear permanently. Logan Pierce. Adrian didn't say the name, but I knew who he was talking about. Military contractor, former special operations, the kind of guy who handled situations that regular law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't touch. We'd served together years ago, back when we were young and stupid and thought we could save the world one mission at a time. You're talking about going outside the law, I said. I'm talking about protecting your son, Adrian replied. The network has been operating for over a decade, Marcus. They're good at what they do, and they're patient. Do you really want to bet Oliver's life on the hope that law enforcement will move fast enough? I looked at the surveillance photos again, at the faces of people who were probably planning the most efficient way to eliminate my family. Then I thought about Oliver's laugh, about the way he still asked me to check for monsters under his bed, about how he'd never again feel completely safe in his own home as long as these people existed. Make the call, I said. Logan Pierce looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 15 years making problems disappear in places that didn't officially exist on any government maps. Weathered face, gray eyes that had seen too much, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're probably the most dangerous person in any room you walk into. When he showed up at my house 3 days after Adrian made the call, he was carrying a duffel bag that I really didn't want to know the contents of and wearing an expression that suggested this was just another Tuesday for him. "Marcus," he said, settling into my kitchen like we were old buddies catching up instead of planning what was essentially a small-scale war. "Adrian, fill me in on your situation. Sorry to hear about your wife trying to murder your kid. That's fucked up, even by my standards. Oliver was at school, which was probably for the best. Some conversations aren't meant for 9-year-old ears, especially when they involve discussions about the most efficient ways to eliminate multiple targets across several states. Logan, I need to know what we're looking at here, I said, pouring him coffee and trying to pretend my hands weren't shaking. How many people are we talking about? What kind of resources do they have? Logan pulled out a tablet and started scrolling through what looked like intelligence reports. Margaret Doyle's network consists of approximately 12 active operatives, plus support staff. The core leadership is Doyle herself, Dr. Felix Braun the chemist, and Harriet Beck the forger. They've got safe houses in Nevada, Arizona, and California, plus a compound outside Las Vegas that serves as their main base of operations. He showed me satellite photos of what looked like a luxury ranch complex in the middle of nowhere. Multiple buildings, high fences, the kind of security setup that suggested serious paranoia about uninvited guests. Here's the good news, Logan continued. They're criminals, not soldiers. Most of them have never been in a real fight in their lives. They rely on stealth, patience, and the fact that nobody suspects nice ladies of being cold-blooded killers. And the bad news. They've got money, resources, and about 12 years of experience staying under law enforcement's radar. Plus, they're already mobilizing to deal with what they see as the Claudine problem. My sources say they're planning to extract her during a prison transfer next week. A prison break. Of course, because apparently my life had officially become an action movie, complete with criminal conspiracies and elaborate rescue operations. They can't let her talk, Logan explained. Claudine knows too much about the operation, including the identities and locations of other operatives. If she decides to cooperate with law enforcement to reduce her sentence, the entire network falls apart. So they'll kill her to keep her quiet. Maybe. Or maybe they'll extract her and relocate her somewhere outside U.S. jurisdiction. Either way, they can't afford to leave loose ends, which means you and Oliver are still targets. Logan pulled up another set of files, showing surveillance photos and background reports on various network operatives. But here's where it gets interesting. While they're focused on the Claudine situation, they're vulnerable. Most of their resources are being diverted to Nevada for the extraction operation, which means their other cells are running with skeleton crews. I studied the photos, trying to wrap my head around the fact that these ordinary-looking women were professional murderers. Suburban soccer moms with perfect smiles and carefully crafted identities, each one probably in the middle of slowly killing some unsuspecting husband while playing the devoted wife role. What are you proposing? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer and wasn't entirely comfortable with it. We hit them while they're distracted, Logan said simply. Take out the active operatives, destroy their infrastructure, and eliminate the leadership before they can regroup. Clean, efficient, permanent solution to your problem. The word eliminate hung in the air like a loaded gun. We were talking about killing people, multiple people, in what amounted to a coordinated assassination campaign. Part of me recoiled from the idea, but a larger part thought about Oliver sleeping peacefully upstairs, finally safe from the woman who'd been slowly poisoning him for months. How many people are we talking about? I asked. 6 active operatives currently deployed, plus the 3 leadership targets. Maybe a few support staff, depending on who's at the compound when we hit it. 9 people minimum. 9 lives that would end because they'd chosen to make a living by murdering families like mine. I thought about Claudine's cold smile when she talked about Oliver asking for seconds of her poisoned cookies, and any moral qualms I might have had evaporated like smoke. What do you need from me? Logan smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Funding, mostly. This kind of operation isn't cheap, and I'm guessing you're motivated enough to pay for quality work. He was right about that. After months of watching my son suffer from mysterious stomach aches while his loving stepmother slowly killed him, I was motivated enough to liquidate my entire savings account if that's what it took to keep him safe. How long will it take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. The operatives in Dallas, Phoenix, and Miami will go first, quick, clean, made to look like accidents or random crime. Then we hit the compound in Nevada during their extraction operation. Maximum chaos, minimum survivors. Logan stood up, shouldering his duffel bag with the casual ease of someone who'd done this kind of thing more times than he could count. One thing you need to understand, Marcus. Once we start this, there's no going back. These people will be dead, and law enforcement will probably never figure out exactly what happened to them. You okay with that? I thought about Oliver's trust fund, about the life insurance policies Claudine had been so eager to update, about the surveillance photos of people watching my house and planning God knows what kind of revenge for disrupting their business model. Yeah, I said, I'm okay with that. Good. I'll be in touch when it's done. After Logan left, I sat in my kitchen staring at my coffee and trying to process what I'd just set in motion. In 2 weeks, 9 people would be dead because I decided that my son's safety was more important than their lives. It should have bothered me more than it did. Instead, all I felt was a cold satisfaction that justice was finally going to be served, even if it wasn't the kind that happened in courtrooms. When Oliver came home from school that afternoon, chattering about his math test and asking if we could have pizza for dinner, I hugged him a little tighter than usual. "Dad, you're squishing me," he complained, but he didn't try to pull away. "Sorry, buddy. Just happy you're home." In 2 weeks, the people who'd threatened my family would be gone forever, and I'd sleep better than I had in months. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and broken dreams, which seemed pretty appropriate for the day Claudine Mercer was finally going to pay for what she'd done to my family. I sat in the gallery wearing my best suit and trying to look like a respectable citizen seeking justice instead of someone who'd recently bankrolled a multi-state assassination campaign. Oliver was at school. Thankfully, some things a kid doesn't need to see, especially when one of those things involves watching his former stepmother get sentenced to spend the rest of her miserable life in prison. It had been 6 months since Logan and his team had systematically dismantled Margaret Doyle's network with the kind of surgical precision that would have impressed the Pentagon. The official reports listed the deaths as a series of unrelated accidents and random crimes. A gas leak explosion in Dallas, a home invasion gone wrong in Phoenix, a tragic hiking accident in the mountains outside Las Vegas. Law enforcement had their suspicions, but suspicions don't hold up in court, and frankly, nobody seemed particularly motivated to investigate too deeply into the deaths of a bunch of professional killers. The compound raid had been Logan's masterpiece. Doyle and her remaining operatives had been in the middle of planning Claudine's extraction when a rival drug cartel had apparently decided to settle some territorial dispute with extreme prejudice. The ensuing firefight had left the entire leadership dead and the compound burned to the ground, along with most of the evidence of their 12-year murder spree. Tragic loss of life, the local sheriff had told reporters with a perfectly straight face. These drug organizations are becoming increasingly violent in their business dealings. Nobody bothered to mention that the supposed cartel members had vanished like smoke, or that the attack had been carried out with military precision by people who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected directions, and sometimes the good guys wear black instead of white hats. With the network destroyed and most of the evidence going up in flames, the prosecution had to build their case against Claudine using what they could prove: the attempted poisoning of Oliver and me, plus the financial fraud charges from Nevada. It wasn't everything she deserved, but it was enough to put her away forever, which was really all that mattered to me. Claudine sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her complexion, her perfectly styled hair now showing gray roots, and her manicured nails bitten down to the quick. 6 months in county lockup had not been kind to the woman who used to spend an hour every morning making herself look like the perfect suburban wife. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a deflated balloon that had lost all its dangerous charm. When she turned to scan the gallery, her eyes found mine and held them for a long moment. There was no longer any pretense of innocence or victimhood in her expression, just pure, concentrated hatred for the man who destroyed her carefully constructed life. I stared right back, thinking about Oliver's laugh and the way he'd started sleeping through the night again once she was gone. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd been dealing with criminals for long enough to develop a healthy skepticism about sob stories and claims of innocence. She listened to Claudine's lawyer make his pitch for leniency, mental illness, history of abuse, remorse for her actions, with the kind of expression that suggested she'd heard it all before and wasn't particularly impressed. "Your Honor," the defense attorney continued, "my client was clearly suffering from severe psychological trauma that impaired her judgment. She's expressed genuine remorse for her actions, and is committed to seeking treatment for her underlying mental health issues. Genuine remorse. Right. The woman who'd smiled while describing how much Oliver enjoyed her poisoned cookies was suddenly overcome with regret about her life choices. District Attorney Sarah Chin stood up to deliver the prosecution's response, and her opening words cut through the courtroom like a scalpel. Your Honor, the defendant engaged in a calculated, systematic attempt to murder a 9-year-old child over a period of several months. This was not a crime of passion or the result of diminished capacity. This was cold-blooded, premeditated murder for financial gain. Chin had done her homework. She laid out the timeline of Oliver's illness, the evidence of arsenic in his system, the insurance policy changes, and the pattern of suspicious deaths surrounding Claudine's previous marriages. By the time she was finished, even Claudine's lawyer looked like he wanted to distance himself from his client. The defendant showed no mercy to a helpless child. Chin concluded. She deserves none from this court. When Judge Hendricks asked if Claudine wanted to make a statement before sentencing, I half expected her to maintain the Innocent Victim Act right up to the end. Instead, she stood up and looked directly at me with that same cold smile I remembered from the hospital. I want Marcus Hale to know that I regret nothing, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Oliver was a means to an end, and if I'd been more careful, he would have died as planned. The only thing I'm sorry about is getting caught. The casual way she talked about planning my son's death made several people in the gallery gasp audibly. Even her own lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and pretend he'd never met her. Judge Hendricks didn't even blink. Thank you for that illuminating insight into your character, Ms. Mercer. It makes my next decision considerably easier. The sentencing was everything I'd hoped for and more. Life without the possibility of parole for the attempted murder charges, plus additional time for fraud and conspiracy. Claudine would die in prison, which was exactly what she deserved. As they led her away in shackles, she turned back one last time to look at me. This isn't over, Marcus, she called out, her voice echoing through the courtroom. There are others like me out there. Others who remember what you did. No, I said, loud enough for her to hear, there aren't. Because Logan had made sure of that. After the sentencing, I stood on the courthouse steps breathing fresh air and feeling lighter than I had in months. Detective Ryan Keller found me there, smoking a cigarette and looking satisfied with the day's work. Good outcome, he said, offering me a cigarette that I declined. Justice served, bad guy behind bars. All that good stuff. Yeah, I agreed. All that good stuff. Ryan studied my face for a moment, and I could see him thinking about all the convenient coincidences that had eliminated the rest of Claudine's network. Funny thing about justice, though? Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. Sometimes it does. You wouldn't know anything about those unexpected places, would you, Marcus? I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. Not a thing, detective. I'm just a regular guy who got lucky that his wife's criminal friends all had such terrible accidents. Ryan laughed and flicked his cigarette into the street. Terrible accidents. Yeah, that's one way to put it. That evening, I picked Oliver up from school and took him out for ice cream to celebrate what I told him was the end of all the legal stuff. He was more interested in his chocolate chip cookie dough cone than the details of courtroom proceedings, which was exactly how it should be. Dad, he said as we walked home, are we safe now? Like really safe? Yeah, buddy, I said, ruffling his hair. We're really safe now. And for the first time in months,